Bonjour, Anin. Wabishka bene sawanakwat. Dijanakaz the Shijak Nadodame Mikanakwaju Nandun Jiba. My English name is Denise Lajmodiere. My tribal name is White Thundercloud Woman. My clan is the Crane Clan. And my home, where I'm at now, is the Turtle Mountain Reservation in Belcourt, North Dakota, which is north central North Dakota, along the Canadian border. And currently I am retired. I can't believe it now. It'll be 5 years this month that I've been retired as an educational leadership professor, principal, and elementary school teacher. So I was in education for 44 years. I was just recently named by the state legislature as the North Dakota State Poet Laureate. And I am the first Native American Poet Laureate. And there hasn't been that many in North Dakota, I think 5 of us, because the previous Poet Laureate, who was my mentor, Dr. Larry Woody, he was named to the position in perpetuity. So he was almost 30 years in the position before he passed away last year. Yeah, so I mostly known as a poet, but when I was working as a professor, I did boarding school research because my parents were boarding schooled and my grandparents, aunts and uncles were all sent to boarding schools, and I had interviewed them about that. So that was part of my academic research. And then I also recently published a children's book. So that was pretty cool.
How do you make a poem?
Like I said, you listen. You listen to the world around you. You listen to what people are saying. You listen. You go deep within. Listen to your heart. Yeah. So a poem can come from anywhere, and you put your butt in chair and you just start writing. It doesn't have to be perfect because there's revise. I tell my students, you need to revise. I'm working with a student right now on revising her poem. So when I took classes with Larry Woody, I didn't know really how to write a poem. I've been trying to write poetry, like I said, since I was 10. Took some poetry classes in high school. Tried to take some creative writing. I did take some creative writing classes my freshman and sophomore year, and in college. This would be the early 70s. But it wasn't until taking his class when he showed me how to do form poems. You know, a villanelle, a sestina, what do you call it? What is Shakespeare, right? Yeah, those. And I told him, I said, well, I only write free verse, like I knew what I was saying to this poet laureate. And he said, well, in order to do free verse and break the rules, you need to know the rules. So I started writing the sestinos and sestinas and villanelles and so on. Those are hard to write, but I love it. So I learned how to write a poem, and there are good poems and there are bad poems. And so that's the way I would teach students, what I hope to work with students or anybody, do workshops in the next 2 years. So yeah, so it's very complicated how to write a poem. But first of all, I think I need absolute quiet when I write. So that's why I like going on writers' retreats. And I like where I currently live. I live by a lake I have a dock overlooking the lake, and I can go down there and sit in just absolute quiet, except for the birds and even the squirrels are a little bit too loud. and just think and write. So some people don't need quiet when they write. But in fact, Larry Woody, he said that he could write his poetry with his 5 kids overhead with cement overshoes on, and he could write. But I need total quiet. So mostly it's again, Joy Harjo says, we must be friends with silence in order to hear. I love that. So that's a way to start forming a poem, is to be friends with silence. And listening to that inner ear. I'm in North Country, and it's cold here, and we have a long, bitter cold. snowy winter, and we waited and waited for spring. And I have a lake out here that I couldn't wait for it to ice out, you know, for to see the water, which seemed like it only happened last week, but it was probably a couple weeks ago. But I do have a poem called Spring Comes Slow to North Country. All right.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Spring comes slow to North Country. The prairie chicken dances the sun toward its northernmost summer home, a slow dance. Pale March light filtered through bare birch limbs offers little heat. The bleak wind brittle as mica. The ice-locked lake begins to moan, a low rumbling, the sound of thunder coming. Ice vibrates like a drumhead, sings so loud it wakes me up. Spring comes slow to North Country. Ice rain stings our faces. Winter-weary bodies crave sun's warmth. First thunder wakes the sleeping earth. Sap begins to flow, calls the snakes. Loons wail, geese return. How I mourned their leaving 7 months ago.